My name is Rachel Myers. I'm 34 years old, and until 2 weeks ago, I still believed I was part of a family. I work as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized tech company in Portland, Oregon. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills and gave me the stability I never had growing up. I bought the house 5 years ago, shortly after my dad passed away. It was meant to be a fresh start, for all of us. I offered to put the house under my name because my mom's credit was in ruins, and my brother Josh was unemployed at the time. I didn't think twice. Family sticks together. At least that's what I used to believe. Things started to change gradually, so slowly I almost didn't notice. Josh got a new job, started making decent money, but never contributed a cent to the house. My mom grew colder, more distant, always finding small faults in everything I did. At first I thought it was just stress or grief from losing Dad, but then family dinners turned into silent meals, birthdays went unacknowledged, and I stopped getting invited to outings altogether. I became a ghost in my own home. Still, I stayed quiet. I convinced myself it was just a phase. It had to be. Then came the night that broke everything. It was a Friday, and I'd come home early with takeout for everyone, something I hadn't done in a while. They were in the living room, laughing at something on TV, drinks in hand, completely unbothered by my arrival. I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to join or retreat. My mom glanced at me, then at Josh, and that's when she said it. "You're not part of this family anymore." Just like that. No warning, no build-up, just a cold sentence that sucked the air out of the room. At first, I thought I misheard. I asked her to repeat it, hoping she'd laugh and say it was a joke, a cruel one, but still a joke. She didn't. Her eyes didn't flinch. Her face was calm, even satisfied. Josh didn't say a word. He just looked at me like I was a stranger who'd accidentally walked into his house. I waited for someone to correct her, to soften the blow. Nothing. The silence was louder than her words. I dropped the food on the table and walked upstairs, my hands trembling, heart pounding. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I woke up early and left before they were up. I spent the day walking around the city, trying to make sense of what had happened. Every corner of Portland reminded me of memories I thought we shared. Parks where we had picnics, cafes where we laughed until we cried. Now all those memories felt like lies. I kept hearing her voice in my head. "You're not part of this family anymore." How does someone say that to their own daughter? Their sister? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in that house much longer. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept all the legal documents. I pulled out the deed to the house and stared at the name printed clearly on the first page. Rachel A. Myers. It was mine. Every wall, every piece of flooring, every window, mine. I'd signed the papers, paid the mortgage, handled the repairs. Suddenly, the house didn't feel like a shared space anymore. It felt like evidence, like a forgotten card I was about to play. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there planning. On Monday, I contacted a real estate agent. I didn't tell anyone. Not my coworkers, not my friends. I wanted to keep this decision private until the very end. The agent was fast, professional, and understanding. Within a few days, we had a couple of interested buyers. I scheduled the showings while they were at work, carefully removing anything that might suggest they lived there. I boxed up my essentials and moved them to a storage unit. By Friday, we had an offer. A good one. I signed. The closing process was quick, surprisingly smooth. The buyers wanted immediate possession, and I didn't see a reason to delay. I stayed in a hotel for the last 2 nights, watching from a distance as my plan came together. No texts, no warnings, no farewell speech. Just silence. The same kind of silence they gave me that night in the living room. It felt poetic in a way. All I could think was, if I'm not part of the family, I don't owe them an explanation. The day the buyers took possession, I returned to the house one last time. It was early morning. I stood in the living room, now empty, the walls echoing with nothing but my own footsteps. The house felt smaller without the furniture, like a stage after the final act. I walked through each room, pausing at the doorways, letting the silence settle. There were no tears, just a quiet peace. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. I didn't leave a note. That evening, I got a call from my mom. I didn't answer. Then one from Josh. Then texts, first confused, then angry, then pleading. I muted them all. I had nothing to say, and for the first time, they had to listen. Without me raising my voice, without confrontation, I had spoken louder than I ever had before. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. And in that clarity, I finally found myself. After everything, I expected to feel triumphant, like I'd won something. But sitting alone in a small hotel room, surrounded by silence that wasn't forced this time, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. The television played quietly in the background, but I couldn't focus. My phone kept lighting up with calls I ignored, notifications I refused to read. I kept thinking about the last look on my mother's face the day she told me I didn't belong. That look didn't haunt me. It made me question everything I ever believed about love, loyalty, and home. The hotel was temporary, but the emptiness I carried felt permanent. I spent the next few days working remotely, avoiding questions from coworkers. They noticed I was quieter, more distant, but no one pried. I appreciated that. I wasn't ready to explain myself, not when the story still felt raw in my throat. On the third night, I ordered takeout and sat by the window, watching strangers come and go. I wondered if anyone else had gone through something similar, being cut out without cause, erased from the lives you helped build. Part of me kept waiting for an apology, some kind of reckoning. I imagined my mom realizing what she'd done, maybe showing up at my hotel, finally understanding the weight of her words. But it never happened. The messages stopped after a week. Silence again. But this time it was different. This time, I controlled it. I started sleeping better. The anxiety that used to tighten my chest each night slowly loosened. I began to feel the difference between loneliness and peace. They aren't the same thing. I decided to stay in the city for a while longer. Portland had always been home, even if the house no longer was. I found a short-term rental in the Alphabet District, a tiny studio above a bakery. The scent of fresh bread in the mornings reminded me that life moves on. I decorated the space with soft lights, secondhand furniture, and a single plant I named Mia. It was small, but it was mine. And this time, no one could tell me I didn't belong. I made my own space, on my own terms. Over the next few weeks, I started rebuilding routines. I'd wake up early, go for walks through the neighborhood, try new cafes, even began sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. There was a comfort in rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of that house, that family. I realized how much I had silenced myself over the years just to keep things peaceful. But peace built on silence isn't real. It's suffocation, dressed as compromise. One Sunday afternoon, I ran into an old friend from high school, Lena. We hadn't talked in years, but she recognized me immediately. We grabbed coffee, and the conversation flowed easily. She asked how I'd been, and for a second I considered lying, brushing it off, but I didn't. I told her the truth, or at least most of it. Her reaction wasn't pity, it was understanding. She'd gone through something similar with her own father. That connection reminded me I wasn't alone, even if I'd felt that way for so long. Lena introduced me to a few of her friends, and before I knew it, I was being invited to dinners, trivia nights, little gatherings that made me feel human again. Not just someone drifting between hotel rooms and legal documents. These people didn't know the old version of me, the one who tolerated silence and swallowed hurt. They only knew Rachel now, the Rachel who took back her voice by walking away. And that version, it turned out, was a lot stronger than I ever imagined. Work became easier, too. I started contributing more confidently in meetings, even pitched a campaign that got approved within a day. My boss noticed. "Something's different about you," she said with a smile. I just nodded. She didn't need the backstory. I was changing, and it was showing. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't surviving. I was living. And I didn't owe that to anyone else. I owed it to the moment I finally stopped waiting for someone to choose me. Still, there were nights when the past came knocking. A memory, a scent, a dream that dragged me back to that living room. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, unsure of where I was. But those moments passed quicker now. I'd remind myself where I was, what I'd done, and why. I'd take a breath, drink some water, and go back to sleep. Healing isn't linear. Some wounds close slowly, but they do close. And each time, the scar reminds you of the strength it took to survive. 2 months after selling the house, I walked by it. I didn't plan to. It just happened during a long walk on a sunny afternoon. It looked different now. New owners had painted the door blue, added planters on the porch. I stood across the street, watching as laughter spilled from inside. A family lived there. A real one, I hoped. I didn't feel sadness or regret, just closure. I turned away and kept walking. That chapter was over, and I was finally ready to write the next one. Life, I was learning, isn't about what you hold on to. It's about what you make space for. In the months following the sale of the house, I stopped checking my phone for messages that would never come. I changed my number, deleted old contacts, blocked email addresses I once memorized. It wasn't out of anger. It was necessity, a kind of emotional pruning. If something withers long enough, it stops being worth saving. And no matter how much it once meant, you learn to let it fall away. I started therapy, something I'd postponed for years. It felt strange at first, opening up to someone paid to listen. But my therapist, Naomi, had a calm presence that made it easier. She didn't offer easy answers or forced positivity. She let the silence speak when it needed to, just like I had done in that house. Slowly, I began to understand how deeply I'd compromised myself over the years, thinking it was love. But love doesn't make you invisible. It doesn't make you small. Naomi helped me untangle memories I'd buried, like the times my mother would blame me for things Josh did, or when I was left behind on vacations because there wasn't enough room. I'd always found ways to justify it, to protect them. But what I'd really been doing was abandoning myself. And once you start abandoning yourself, it becomes easier for others to do the same. I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad, not just for what I lost, but for what I never had in the first place. The clarity that came with therapy gave me the courage to take bigger steps. I applied for a promotion at work, something I'd never dared to do before. I began attending local art classes, picking up my sketchbook with purpose instead of nostalgia. I even booked a solo trip to Santa Fe, something I'd dreamed about but always put off. I stopped living in the shadow of the person I was trying to be for them, and I started showing up as who I really was. Imperfect, yes, but honest. One evening, while sketching at a cafe, a woman approached me. Her name was Claire. She was curious about my work, and we talked for over an hour. She was warm, sincere, and there was a lightness to our conversation that felt rare. We started seeing each other casually, and though neither of us was rushing into anything, it felt refreshing. There was no pressure to perform or prove myself. With her, I was just Rachel. No baggage, no expectations. Just present. Claire encouraged me to share my art online. "People need to see what you see," she said. I hesitated at first, afraid of judgment or failure. But then I remembered. I had already survived the worst kind of rejection. What could strangers possibly say that would hurt more than being erased by your own family? So I created a page, posted a few sketches, and to my surprise, people responded. Not just with likes, but with messages. Stories of others who'd felt invisible too. Each message reminded me that my pain wasn't an anomaly. It was a thread in a much larger fabric. There were others who had been told, subtly or directly, that they didn't belong. Others who had walked away from people who claimed to love them, but only under conditions. And in sharing my work, I wasn't just healing. I was helping others feel seen. That, more than anything, made it all worth it. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is turn pain into connection. As fall approached, I felt a shift inside me. I no longer flinched at old photos or winced at family holidays. I started creating new traditions, friends giving dinners, holiday movie nights with Lena and Claire, spontaneous weekend hikes. My life wasn't perfect, but it was full, and I had built it from the ground up. There was pride in that, not the loud, boastful kind, but a quiet certainty that I'd earned every bit of peace I now held. One afternoon, out of curiosity more than anything, I Googled my brother. He'd started a podcast, apparently. In one episode, I heard him mention family estrangement and how some people choose drama over unity. I didn't feel hurt. I felt removed, like watching a storm through a window. You see the chaos, but it doesn't touch you anymore. That distance was a gift I gave myself. I closed the browser, smiled faintly, and went back to my sketch. By winter, I was living in a new apartment. Bigger, brighter, still close to the bakery I loved. Claire helped me move, and as we unpacked boxes, She found an old photo of me with my mom and Josh. I took a long look at it, then slipped it into a drawer. Not out of shame, but acknowledgement. That chapter was written, and it mattered, but it didn't define the rest of the story. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing. And every day, I chose myself. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of quiet contentment I hadn't known before. The city bloomed in soft colors. Cherry blossoms lined the sidewalks. Cafes spilled onto the streets, and the air smelled of possibility. I walked slower now, not because I was lost or unsure, but because I finally had time to look around. I no longer measured my days by tension or expectation. Each morning was mine, untouched by guilt or fear. And that simple freedom, just existing without explanation, was more precious than I ever imagined. Claire and I grew closer, but we took our time. We weren't trying to fix each other. We just showed up, consistently, honestly, without masks. One evening, while cooking dinner together, she looked at me and said, "You're not afraid to be alone, are you?" I paused, then smiled. Not anymore. And it was true. I had walked through abandonment, faced the echo of empty rooms, and came out whole. My heart didn't ache for what was lost. It opened for what was possible. I kept seeing Naomi weekly. Therapy wasn't a cure. It was a practice, a place to lay down the parts of myself I was still learning to hold. One session, she asked me if I missed them, my family. I thought about it for a long time. "I miss who I thought they were," I said, "but not who they proved to be." She nodded. There was no triumph in that statement, only truth. Grief doesn't always come from death. Sometimes, it's the slow loss of illusions you once called love. There was one last box I hadn't opened since I left the house. I found it while reorganizing my closet, labeled in my own handwriting, "Keep, decide, later." Inside were old letters, childhood drawings, a bracelet my mom gave me when I turned 16. I sat on the floor, holding that bracelet, and for the first time, I let myself cry, not out of anger or pain, but out of release. I whispered, "I forgive you, not for her, but for me." Because carrying that weight any longer would only cost me more of myself. I donated most of the box. Some things I kept, not to revisit the past, but to remind myself how far I'd come. We don't erase our stories. We reshape them. That house, that moment in the living room, the silence. It would always be part of my history, but it no longer held power over my future. I was the one writing now, and my voice, once quiet and afraid, had grown steady, strong. I no longer needed to be heard by them. I had heard myself. That summer, I was invited to speak at a small creative panel, women sharing stories of reinvention through art. I almost declined. Public speaking terrified me, but Lena nudged me. Claire cheered me on, and I said yes. The room wasn't big, maybe 30 people, but as I told my story, carefully, openly, I watched eyes fill with recognition. Not pity, not shock, just connection. Afterward, a woman hugged me and said, "You said what I've never been able to put into words." That was enough. Sometimes the smallest audiences leave the deepest impact. That night, walking home, I thought about how far I'd traveled without ever leaving the city. A few miles away sat a house I no longer called mine. But here I was, free, whole, loved in a way I chose for myself. I no longer needed validation from people who once refused to see me. I had built a life where I belonged, not because someone allowed it, but because I claimed it. Every step, every scar, every silence broken. A year to the day after I left, I wrote a letter to myself. I didn't intend to share it with anyone. It was just for me. I wrote about the night my mother cut me out, and how I once thought that moment would define me forever. I wrote about the house sale, the hotel room, the silence that followed. But I ended the letter with this: "You didn't just walk away. You walked toward yourself, and that's the most powerful thing you've ever done." I folded it, sealed it, and placed it in the same drawer where the photo now lived. I never heard from my mom again. Josh sent one more message, months later, short, vague, full of words that didn't land. I didn't respond, not because I hated him, but because I loved myself too much to reopen doors that led to nowhere. Some stories don't get closure. Some relationships stay broken, and that's okay. Healing isn't fixing everything. It's learning to live fully, even with some cracks. My life wasn't perfect, but it was true. And that was enough. Today, I sit by the window of my new studio, sunlight warming the floor, sketchbook open. Mia, the plant, is still alive. Barely. Claire is reading on the couch, her laugh soft in the background. And I am here, exactly where I'm meant to be. Not because someone made room for me, but because I did. I made this life with quiet strength, with fierce grace. And in that silence once used to erase me, I finally found my voice.